Welcome back to another episode of Perligo Ponders, in which I respond to your comments, questions, and theories about my own comments, questions, and theories related to the lore and music of 21 Pilots. At this point, we are well into the month of November, and as always, there's quite a lot to discuss, so let's get into it. This question is from Greg Bork, if I pronounced that correctly. Hey Perligo, for the next Perligo Ponders, a Paladin Straight music video, how do you think the bishops got the power to look through the vulture's eyes to see before Clancy and the Banditos attack? Also, why did Nico always try to take Clancy back into the city during Trench, but Skill and I say they just let him go? There's two parts to this, right? Okay, so vulture's eyes. How does that relate to the bishop's powers? How did they get that power? From my recollection, we're not given a clear answer to this, to where that power came from. What's interesting is it seems like, especially what we see in Paladin Straight, the bishop seizing the vultures is not happening one-to-one. It isn't like one bishop seizes one vulture. And the vultures are already described at other points in the story as surveillance tools. So there might be a sense in which the vultures are almost possessed by the bishops in a larger or more lasting sense than the bishops possess a citizen and seize him. Again, I don't think we explicitly see this laid out. The short answer, as Joseph said, I think the short answer simply is that the vultures are being seized and they're being used as vessels to observe, and so the bishops kind of control them and use them as these surveillance drones, surveillance voids. In terms of how they got the power, I mean, that's really asking how they got the power of psychokinesis in the first place, and that's a longer question that I don't know if we're going to be able to answer ever, right? That's kind of just an intrinsic part of the story that they have the power. You know, it's a miraculous power and a hijacked religion is how they describe it in the I'm Clancy video. So I don't know. It's an interesting question, and it speaks to this broader idea of psychokinesis and what that power is, and the little that we know about it, the little that Clancy knows about it, I don't think can really properly answer this question other than initial theorizing. In terms of the second part of this question, why do they bring him back in Trench, but in Skill and Icy and Clancy, they just let him go? I mean, I think the short answer there is they bring him back in Trench because they know where he is, and in Skilled and Icy, they think he's dead. Clancy, you can question whether or not they know he's dead or they know he's alive, but they know he's coming back, right? At the end of The Outside, he makes himself known in the sense that he, at the very least, makes the bishops aware of the fact that someone else has the power of psychokinesis and can use it against them by seizing Keon's corpse and attacking the tower. If they jump to the conclusion that that is Clancy, given that he would be the one that would make sense to be able to wield this power, that would be an understandable conclusion for them to jump to. Then they would probably understand that Clancy was sending this as a message that he's coming back to attack, rather than he's trying to hide, right? I don't think someone who's trying to hide would start making their presence known to the bishops. So in terms of the Clancy era, I think there's a sense in which they knew he was going to come back. They knew he was going to return to Dima, so they didn't feel any particular need to track him down so much as prepare to kind of trap him there once he got there. Dragon21 asks, whatever happened with the Necromancer? He showed up in the contract once, but as far as I know, he doesn't show up again. I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. It's one that I've been asking myself also. I think it really comes down to who the Necromancer is. Given that we didn't see a new character introduced who was playing the role of the Necromancer or who was called the Necromancer, it has to be a title for an existing character in the lore. And in my mind, the top contenders for that would be obviously Blurryface, Clancy, or the Torchbearer. I think given the visual imagery of the videos for Paladin Straight, The Contract, and City Walls, and given that The Contract, that song is sung in this void, outside of which stands Nico, that one clear interpretation could just be that the Necromancer is Nico. He's the one who's outside, and so Clancy's trying to stay quiet and not let Blurryface into his mind to control his thoughts. But yeah, no, it's an interesting question. We didn't see anything more kind of explicit from that, but again, I think it's just a term for a character who already exists. I'm forgetting what the technical translation is for Necromancer, but I've always understood it to be someone who kind of raises spirits from the dead. And if you look at, again, those three music videos, the ones who are raising spirits from the dead are the bishops in Paladin Straight. Raising the Glory is Gone. They're the ones who deal in death in Necro. And, you know, there's the Necropolis, I believe, was the name for part of Dima, or the towers in the center of Dima, or something like that. Titles that are relating to people who deal in death seems like something that would be related to the bishops, not the Torchbearer and the Banditos. The next question we have comes from Greg Perligo ponders, Breach wasn't very lore related. I thought it was the last album in the story. It would be lore packed, but really only the contract, city walls, and kind of intentions. Do you wish that Clancy and Breach would have been more lore explicit? Love the content. So I'm going to push back a little bit here. And I don't think it was just the contract, city walls, and intentions. There's a lot of songs you can relate to the lore in terms of very clearly lore related. I would say city walls, the contract, potentially One Way. We talked about this last week a little bit. Potentially One Way, but less so. And then Tally, intentions, and drag path. Now, I think something that I feel like I've talked about this before, but even if I haven't, something that I was thinking about. A lot of people ever since Trench wanted a lore-filled album to be like Trench. And I understand that because I wanted that too. But I also don't think that an album not mirroring Trench or following the Trench formula in terms of how lore-packed it was means that other albums are empty of lore. We can discuss for hours, as we've proven time and again, whether or not the albums pre-Blurry Face are part of the lore. Leaving that aside, they have confirmed Blurry Face is where it started, in a sort of official storytelling sense, and Breach is where it ended. And if you look at those 5 albums that are all story-based albums and all part of the Trench saga, Trench is obviously the one that does the most world building and has the most lore-related songs, but Blurry Face is a lore album, Skill Nicey is a lore album, Clancy is a lore album, and Breach is a lore album. And of those, Trench really is the exception and not the rule. And I think it set a rule by being the most lore-filled, and everything paled in comparison to that. But when you look at the trend, Trench is the odd one out, and the others kind of have more of a balance between songs that relate to the lore and songs that are not as clearly related to the lore or are more real-world, real-life songs, if you will. So, did I want or hope that Breach might be as lore-filled as Trench? That would have been cool. Am I surprised that it wasn't? Or do I think that it's weird that it wasn't? Not really, because it's kind of just following the trend that the rest of them followed. You know, we can argue about how many lore songs are on Blurry Face before the lore was officially established in Trench, but I think you can say there were quite a few. Heavy Dirty Soul is a key one, Goner, I would argue fairly local. The Judge, Doubt, obviously, stuff like that. And certainly when you consider that the album Blurry Face is named after a key player in the story, and the album Clancy is named after a key player in the story, well, there you go. Next up, we have a question from Ion K7U. Haven't seen this name for a while, but used to comment a lot in Perligo Ponders. Why did Keons use antlers in the outside to seize if the bishops in Paladin Strait didn't need to? Do the antlers hold power everyone can use? Clancy seems to be an exception because he doesn't need the antlers to use the power of necromancy. So just on that last bit there, is it true that Clancy doesn't need the antlers to use the power of necromancy? I feel like he always is using the antlers when he's doing anything with the power of necromancy. So, I mean, the real question that I see here is, why do the bishops need to use the antlers sometimes and not others? Why does Keons use the antlers when the bishops in other times don't need to use the antlers? Why does he use the antlers to seize Trash, the dragon? I think it could be that they're an amplifier. It could be that there's a way in which they can use the antlers to focus their power more on a specific thing farther away. You can use your voice to talk to someone who's in the same room as you, or to shout out of a window to someone who's in the street next to you, but you can't talk to someone who's under the sea several miles away without using a telephone or something. You need it to focus in or to go farther. Jackie Morrison. Can the driver in Heavy Dirty Soul be a Clancy? He's out there, and he would have the Bandito coat also. I think the driver in Heavy Dirty Soul certainly at some point could be someone who in the past was Clancy. I don't know that they are now. I'm a little confused by this question in terms of having the Bandito coat and being out there. Like, Clancy's out there, and they're going to try again to try to rescue Clancy because he's still out there. It's more likely that the driver isn't directly a Clancy in the sense that we are familiar with Clancy so much as someone who in the past was a version of Clancy who became a bishop. Especially because we have this idea of Nico driving him out in one cycle or one version of the story. So with that being said, thank you to everyone who commented and included questions to be featured in this episode of Perligo Ponders. As always, if you would like a comment or question to be featured in the next episode, comment something interesting that you think was worth discussing to a further extent. either below this video or anywhere on the channel or in the community tab as well.